2 years ago, I read a Globe and Mail book review on this book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And as soon as I read it, I saw something there and was struck by a truth there. I thought, I have got to preach on this contemporary, decades-long parable sometime soon. A few excerpts from that review, and also interspersed in that an excerpt from the book. So in case you didn't do the homework, if you didn't do the homework, get on the email list. That way you get the link and you get to read what I'm about to read now. Think about it before this morning. But if you didn't get to hear this story or don't know what it's about, this is what it's about. The mortal life of Henrietta Lacks wasn't especially remarkable. Born in rural Virginia in 1920, she grew up on the tobacco fields of her ancestors farmed as slaves. She got pregnant at 13, again at 16, got married 4 years later, moved to Baltimore, where her husband worked in the steel mill, and she gave birth to 3 more children, then died of cervical cancer in the colored ward of Johns Hopkins Hospital in 1951. The afterlife of Henrietta Lacks, however, proved nothing short of extraordinary. Since before the turn of the century, scientists have struggled to grow living tissues outside of the human body. Every sample they removed died soon thereafter. But Lacks's cancerous cells, taken without her knowledge just months before she died, were altogether different. Termed HeLa, H-E-L-A, after the first 2 letters of the patient's full name, they grew, those cells, like crabgrass, doubling in size every 24 hours, filling as much space as lab technicians could provide. They proved to be the first immortal human cells, a continuously dividing line of cells all descended from one original sample, cells that would constantly replenish themselves and never die. Isolated at a time when researchers were starting to understand how viruses spread, HeLa ignited a scientific revolution. The cells developed the polio vaccine, gene mapping, in vitro fertilization. They helped uncover the mysteries of space, cloning, the effects of the atomic bomb. And then from the book, they helped develop drugs for treating herpes, leukemia, hemophilia, and Parkinson's disease. They've been used to study lactose digestion, sexually transmitted diseases, appendicitis, human longevity. One doctor says, HeLa cells were one of the most important things that happened to medicine in the last 100 years. So the book then goes on to say, and those cells, if they were all stacked on a scale, would weigh more than 100 Empire State Buildings. So many cells of HeLa have been cultured. Stretched end to end, they'd easily wrap around the Earth 3 times. Why do we always got to do the round the Earth thing? I wonder how many Olympic-sized swimming pools they could fill. A lot of cells. And they have been bought and sold by the billions. And yet, back in East Baltimore, Lacks's children, who couldn't get themselves into a doctor because they could never afford it, spent 2 decades knowing nothing of their mother's contribution. That is a powerful story. Through the cancerous cells of the descendant of slaves, God providentially brought freedom and hope to countless disease-laden souls. Through something so broken, so wrong, so unfair as the premature death of this young woman and young mother, an amazing greater good resulted. And as I considered that greater good in the face of short-term evil, the biblical story of Joseph came to mind in this one verse. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Now Joseph said those words to his brothers, who were afraid that Joseph was about to have them killed, because they sold Joseph into slavery some years earlier, because they were envious of him, because he was a bit of a spoiled brat and Dad's favorite kid. Joseph was sold into slavery, but he ended up as Pharaoh's right man in Egypt, right-hand man, and he ended up being used of God to create a huge grain storage plan in preparation for a 7-year famine that would have devastated the population. A famine, 7 years, spread like a cancer, like a virus throughout that region. And because Joseph's plan was put in place, many, many lives, the saving of many lives, happened. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph was talking to his brothers, but I could imagine that the truth of those words could easily have come out of Henrietta Lacks' mouth, speaking to her cancer, or to the presence of injustice in her life, or to evil, or to the evil one. She was a very religious woman. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what's now being done, the saving of many lives. God is a God who mysteriously transforms our tragedies, life events that we can only right now understand and experience as broken, hopeless, and evil. God mysteriously transforms those things into restored, hopeful, and good things. Good things that often play out in larger contexts, later contexts, other contexts, invisible to us contexts, and sometimes even nearly or never clearly made known to us contexts. For Henrietta Lacks, this was a disaster. 31, with all these kids and her husband. And here she is being ravaged by this tumorous cancer. For the Lacks family, it was a disaster. Their wife, their mother, their sister, their daughter dying this tragic death due to cervical cancer. And then a system that kind of adds insult to the injury by taking advantage unknowingly of these cells and people making all kinds of money while they're so poor and suffering without their knowing. But for millions, I would imagine, of cancer sufferers and people who've suffered with all of these diseases that HeLa has enabled research to be done into, a very great good has been accomplished, came to be. For Joseph, getting tossed into that pit and then sold by his very own blood to a caravan of traders to move from favored son to slave was a disaster. And yet, from a national, international, regional perspective, so many lives were saved. This is who God is. This is what God is like. This is how God works, mysteriously works in His world. We all, you know somebody who's had cancer, or maybe one of these diseases, or Parkinson's. You do. In your life, right? We all know somebody. We are all, therefore, the beneficiaries of Henrietta Lacks in 1951 dying of cervical cancer and those cells becoming and doing what they became and enabled us to do, the scientific world. Through the life and death of one person, God has providentially brought hope and healing and restoration to you and to me and to us. Through the field of medicine, that's resulted. So I'm sitting in my hair salon place this week getting my hair cut, and the poor woman Anita hears these sermons, right, sort of midweek, and I work them out, and my haircuts are getting shorter and shorter. She wants to get me out of there. Not really. She loves the conversation, and she's part of New Hope, and we were talking about the whole story of New Hope and the hard part of the last 6 months, and why are you preaching this way, and the church wondering what the heck they're doing at New Hope. And I said, but I think, yeah, we preach God's word in the Bible, but we have to preach what God's saying today too, right? Both. And she's nodding and agreeing. And then the connection comes, and I'd spoken to her about the Henrietta Lacks story, which she didn't know about. And I said, the research through HeLa's cells, they made a difference in your mom's life. Her mom had cancer last year and was successfully treated, and then all of a sudden Anita's like in tears, and I'm in tears. And this story, contemporary story of God saying, yeah, this bad thing is happening, and it was intended for evil, but it's going to be worked out to save many people's life. It was her life, her family's life, your family's life that was saved with a few extra years of life. That's why we preach modern-day parables, because God is this kind of God right now, providentially working through the pain that you're going through right now, physically, psychologically, relationally, with your parents, with your family, with your job, your pain, your burden, your cross, your suffering, all for a greater good, believe it or not. A larger good. There's no way Joseph or Henrietta Lacks could have had any idea the story would have played out the way it did for the good of so many souls.